Morning, good afternoon, good evening around the world. My name is Doug Brunke. I'm the founder and CEO of Global Chamber. We couldn't have a better program to kick off 2022 than on global mindset with two extraordinary experts, and including Professor Mansour JAVIDAN, who is the world's authority on global mindset. We're going to be talking about what are dynamic companies that are growing globally doing in these times of current and post-COVID to be successful in their businesses. There's so much going on in global business today with the world, and it's never been more important to have global mindset and to really rethink, especially at the beginning of the year, what are some of the best ways that we can incorporate these concepts into successful businesses going forward. So we're going to have a really fun conversation. Our first speaker is Professor Mansour JAVIDAN. He is a Thunderbird professor. He basically wrote the book on global mindset. Certainly every Thunderbird student who goes through schooling there walks away with a sensibility, not just from the students, but from the professors, about how to think about the world in unique and different ways. It's one of the great things about Thunderbird. It's one of the reasons why I started Global Chamber, because I was so inspired by what I've learned on the campus, the old campus of Thunderbird. And now, Professor, you are on the new campus of Thunderbird, a brand new building in downtown Phoenix, Global Phoenix Rising. So happy that you could join us today and share your thoughts about this important topic. Professor, I turn it over to you. Thank you for sharing.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much, Doug, for the introduction. And for everybody's benefit, the new building that Doug was talking about is right behind me. We're very excited to be in this new and fantastic building and start the new journey, or the new phase of the journey for Thunderbird. And I'm very excited to be with you and share some thoughts with you. In this presentation, Renee and I have put together kind of two topics that are directly related to each other. One is, what exactly is global mindset and why is it important? And which is what I will cover. And then Renee is going to talk about how do you leverage global mindset to manage your corporate culture in a global environment. So it's a very interesting talk, very timely. Before I share my presentation and start my talk, I want to address one relevant point. Over the past few years, with the political events in the US and UK, there has been talk and discussion about deglobalization and countries and companies going back to their homes and reducing their global footprint. Well, all of this talk sounds fantastic and interesting, but it's not true. The evidence and the facts do not support that. The latest information that we have is that global trade has continued to grow, and the global connected index, which DHL and New York University have put together, which is a really valuable way of looking at how global trade and global exposure is moving along. Well, it's moving along very nicely. There are different forces that have been added to this efforts to globalize organizations, but there is no such thing. The evidence has no information about any kind of a reduction in global footprint and global trade, which means having a global mindset is increasingly important. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to explain what exactly is global mindset, and I'm going to share my slides with you.
hear on everything you just said. Thank you for making that very clear.
Well, you know, the media loves to sensationalize things and talk about doomsday and all of that. But we're scientists and we look at facts and evidence, and it just doesn't support any of that doomsday kind of ideas. So I'm going to start my presentation with 3 examples and 3 little stories. And then I'm going to talk about what exactly is global mindset and why it's relevant. So let's get started. The first story I'm going to share with you is the story of a Coca-Cola salesman in Saudi Arabia. A disappointed salesman of Coca-Cola returned from his assignment to Saudi Arabia. A friend asked, "Why weren't you successful with the Saudis?" The salesman explained, "When I got posted, I was very confident that I would make a good sales pitch. But I had a problem. I didn't know how to speak Arabic. So I planned to convey the message through 3 posters. First poster, a man lying in the hot desert sand, totally exhausted and fainting. Second poster, the man is drinking Coca-Cola. Third poster, our man is now totally refreshed." And then these posters were pasted all over the place. "Terrific, that should have worked," said the friend. "The hell it should have," said the salesman. "No one told me they read from right to left." So it is true in Arabic language, people write and read from right to left. And if you're used to reading and writing from right to left, you look at these posters from right to left, which gives you the exactly the opposite message that the poor salesman was intending. So this little story is about how we do things the way we are used to, and how our way of doing things in our home country, in our home culture, shapes our thinking, shapes our approach to do things. And when we get into global environments and we're exposed to the way that different people do things differently, that can cause some issues in terms of communicating, negotiating, building relationships, etc. So I'm going to go to the second story. In January of 2011, I was flying from Mumbai to Pune in India. And I was flying with Jet Airways. And I was reading their in-flight magazine, and I saw this ad for hiring flight attendants. So at the top, it says, "Be part of the best hospitality offered in the skies." And then at the bottom, it tells you what they're looking for. And there is a bigger version of it on the slide. So age, between 18 and 27 years. Height, male minimum 170 centimeters and female minimum 157 centimeters. Weight in proportion to height. Marital status, unmarried. Physical features, pleasing personality with an unblemished complexion and good eyesight. Now, the reason I'm sharing this with you is everything you see here on this ad was perfectly legal in India in 2011. I'm not up to date on Indian HR regulations, but in 2011, this Indian airline, which operated in India, was following Indian rules and regulations. But those of you who work, and maybe we have lawyers, HR specialists with us today, you know that a whole bunch of things that I just read to you are illegal or unacceptable HR practices in the US, in Canada, in European Union, etc. So you can see that the way that in a country like India, and it's not alone, I've shown this slide to executives in Saudi Arabia, in Indonesia, in Hong Kong. And many of them say, yeah, that's fine. This is a good list of requirements. So again, if you are an American carrier and you want to have operations in India or in Indonesia, etc., your home regulations and rules are quite different from the regulations you have to deal with in other parts of the world. So how do you deal with that diversity? And it's not just diversity. Sometimes it's so contradictory, as you can see right here. But as a manager in a global environment, your job is to figure out what to do. And that is the challenge. Now, I'm going to go to the third story. Before COVID hit us in 2019, late 2018 through all the way to end of 2019, I was traveling in different cities, different countries, different parts of the world. And I was holding workshops on trust with groups of 20 to 30 managers, local managers in that country. And I would start the workshop. These are 3-hour workshops. I would start the workshop with a very simple question. Think of a typical organization in your culture. There is a new colleague, fellow citizen, a new colleague. What does it take for the existing colleagues, the current colleagues, to decide whether or not the new colleague is trustworthy? What do they look for? What should happen for the new colleague to be seen as trustworthy? So I'm going to show you the results of these workshops in different countries. So let's start with US and Germanic Europe and Nordic Europe. I'm going to show you the summary of the results. Performance, #1 criteria. Integrity. Consistency. Is the person consistent in what he or she says over time? Is he or she consistent between what he says and what he does? Does the person deliver results? What are the person's credentials? Is the person qualified? Does the person have the skills and the credentials to do the job? And is the person competent? So as you can see, all of these criteria that I heard from Nordic European, Germanic European, and American managers all relate to task. Does the person deliver on the task? Now, I've done it in other parts of the world, and I want to show you what I heard from them. So these are the criteria that were mentioned in Asian countries, South American countries, Latin European countries, and performance obviously was mentioned. But task-related criteria were only one of the things that they look for. Another one is fit with the group. Does the person fit us? Is the person helpful to us? Not just during the work, but at night. I have a flat tire. I'm going to call the new colleague, and I expect the new colleague to jump in the car and come and help me. That kind of fit with the group. Does the person have ideas that are similar to whatever our group's ideas are? Social time, drinking, going shopping together, tea time, cigarette time. In India, this was a really big deal. Talking about our families was another very important set of criteria. Personal connections of the new colleague. What's this person's family story? Do I know any of the family? What kind of a network does the person have? Does the person have a political network inside the organization? First impression in Latin America, in the Middle East, really big time. What kind of designer brand is the person wearing? Does the person look professional? What school or university did the person go to? And finally, style. Is the person humble? In Japan, is the person polite, respectful? Does the person have positive attitude? So this is the picture. These are the criteria that people in many other parts of the world look for when they want to decide, is this person trustworthy? As you can see, the criteria on this slide are totally different from the criteria I showed you in the previous slide. And you all know, sustainable business relationships require trust. But what it takes to Japanese people to come to trust each other can be quite different from what it takes to German people to come to trust each other. Now you have a German side and you have a Japanese side, and you have to work together. And if they don't understand the other side's way of doing things, you can see it can easily backfire and go in the wrong direction. So again, the purpose of these three stories that I shared with you is to demonstrate the diversity that exists in global environments. So now the question is, okay, in the face of this complexity and this diversity that we are seeing in a global environment, what do we need to be successful? And my answer to that, based on years of research and working with thousands of executives, tens of corporations, is you need a global mindset. Now, I'm going to explain what that means. Before I give you my definition, I want to share with you some other examples. So in understanding what global mindset is, my colleagues and I interviewed 217 very senior global executives all over the world. And we asked them, one of the questions we asked was, what does it take? How do you define global mindset? So here are some answers. One individual said, global mindset to me means that the individual has a global passport, but in their head. In other words, the ability to have multiple perspectives. Another executive said, it's the ability to understand the similarities and differences among cultures and their reasons. Another executive said, I think it's a natural curiosity to learn about other cultures. If you don't have curiosity about other people's other ways of doing things, it makes it really difficult, painful to be in a global environment. Another executive said, rather than being frustrated and intimidated by the differences, seeking them out and enjoying them because you find them fascinating. In other words, you can think of global mindset as your attitude towards diversity of thought and diversity of action. If you have a high global mindset, your attitude is, wow, this is really interesting. I didn't know the way that these people do things can be so different from our way of doing things. I'm going to try to learn, and I'm going to make it's going to make me a better person. Doesn't mean it's easy, but I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it. I'm curious. People who have a low global mindset, their reaction is, oh my God, this is really hard. Why don't these people understand me? Why don't I understand them? So an attitude of frustration, anxiety, stress, confusion. Finally, my own favorite definition that one executive shared with me, being comfortable with being uncomfortable in uncomfortable environments. When you're in a global environment, most people are out of their comfort zone. So someone who has a high global mindset, their reaction is, yeah, I know, it's different, but I'm going to figure it out. It's okay. But someone who has a low global mindset, their reaction is, how can I get out of this environment? How can I stop? Because it's painful, it's stressful, very uncomfortable. So here's my definition of global mindset. It's a collection, it's a set of individual qualities and characteristics. If you have a high level of these attributes, it makes it easier for you to work well with people who are different from you. Doesn't matter where you're from. If you have a high profile in terms of the specific individual characteristics, it makes it easier for you to work well with people who are different from you. So what are these individual characteristics? We've done a lot of research on this. Our database is over 60,000 people. So there are three major dimensions to global mindset. We call them capitals. Intellectual capital is the cognitive side of global mindset. It's about how much you know about your industry, your competitors, your markets in different parts of the world. Cosmopolitan outlook refers to how much you know about cultures, histories, world events. And cognitive complexity means how easy it is for your brain to handle all this additional information that you have to deal with. Psychological capital is the emotional side. Passion for diversity is your curiosity about other people, other ways of doing things. Quest for adventure means how much of an Indiana Jones you have in you, how willing you are to test yourself, to push yourself. And self-assurance means how confident you are in your ability to succeed in global roles. And finally, social capital is the behavioral side. It's how you actually interact with people who are different from you. So intercultural empathy means how easy it is for you to put yourself in the shoes of someone from another part of the world. It doesn't mean you agree with them, but you are able to see the world through their eyes. You are able to understand the way they understand the world. And then you decide, do you agree with it or not? Interpersonal impact refers to how much experience you have negotiating agreements and contracts with people in different parts of the world. And diplomacy has two very important features to it. One, how good a listener you are. Anytime I ask that question, everybody raises their hands. Of course, I'm a good listener. Actually, most people are wrong. Being a good listener is not a passive act, it's an active act. And when you are in a global environment, it is doubly important for you to be a good listener because you need to pick up the message, the nuances, the cultural underpinnings. So it is a very important requirement to be a good listener. And the other part of diplomacy is your ability to bring divergent views together. Because when you work with people from different parts of the world, they have different ideas. But as a manager, you need to figure out a way of creating agreement. So how do you do it? So the picture you're looking at is what we call global mindset. And Doug made reference to this. We have we've designed a scientific questionnaire called Global Mindset Inventory that measures your profile and in terms of these attributes. And every student who enters Thunderbird completes it and at the time of entrance and at the time of graduation. And we've done it with thousands, tens of thousands of managers and executives in different parts of the world. So this picture is what you need if you want to be successful in a global environment. And that brings me to the end. Thank you. Renee, I'm going to pass it to you now.
Fantastic. Thank you. And before we introduce Renee, I just want to let everybody know that we will have some time for questions at the end. So save those and feel free to use the chat area to ask questions and also to introduce yourself. Feel free to do that as well. I do have one quick question, Professor JAVIDAN, and that is, you alluded to this, the measurement of global mindset. Is that done on an individual level? Can it be done within a company or a community? Is it done by country? Is it done by the world? You know, how can that be measured? Is it actual a quantitative number?
Doug, the quick answer is yes to all of that. So we do have an individual-based instrument which measures an individual's profile. And then we do it for teams, for units, for functions. For example, we have clients who want to know how strong is the global mindset of our marketing function or production function. We have done it for executive teams. So CEOs come to us and say, I want to know if my top management team has the global mindset that we need to be successful with our global ambitions. We can do it at different levels. Because we have such a large database, Doug, we also have been able to compare kind of managers in different countries in terms of their profiles.
Got it. And just one more quick question. What's your expert opinion about how well we collectively are doing, both in maybe in the United States as an example, or in the world? Isn't technology and information allowing us to be better at global mindset? It goes back to your earlier point about the media talking. That's one data point, but aren't we getting better with global mindset? What do you think?
You know, you are asking a question that many government officials, politicians, and corporate executives ask. Here's the situation. Everything you said is true. Technology has facilitated global connections. But I tell you, globalization and technology has created winners and losers in many countries, especially in the developed world. Those of us who are fortunate enough to have access to the education, to the technology, to the exposure, to the professional expertise that we would leverage in global environment, we love it and we benefit from it. But in many of our societies, there are people who are not that fortunate, who have lost jobs because their employers have outsourced their manufacturing operation to Mexico because they can do it through the technology virtually and at a lower cost. So what is going on is there is commonality built across borders in specific groups. So the professionals in US think very similarly to the professionals in the Middle East because they're all benefiting. But there are many people in the Middle East and there are many people in the US that do not have those options. And they're the ones who see themselves as the losers of this. And they're the ones who create concern for politicians and for governments. What happened to us? Who's going to take care of us? And the other problem is age. So many people, particularly in developed countries, are at an age that developing new skills and becoming new experts is just too hard. So globalization has winners and losers. There's no doubt about it.
And you are a winner. So thank you for sharing us that information. You can see, I think everybody in the audience can see why Professor JAVIDAN is recognized as a top 100 most influential authors in the organizational behavior space around the world. So thank you for all of that. Our next speaker is Renee Meyer. We are going to, by the way, wrap up at the top of the hour. So Renee has, I think, about 15 minutes or so of content. So we should have about 15 minutes for additional Q&A. Thank you for those of you who are already asking questions in the chat area. Renee is both an American and a Swiss citizen. She's based in Strasbourg, France, as we talked about earlier. She's got a very unique business niche where she's helping primarily companies in Switzerland, France, both Germanic and French speaking, to be successful in the Midwest United States. And she sees a connection between some of the cultural aspects of doing business between those areas. She's a polyglot. She speaks English, French, German, and Spanish. And of course, she's a Thunderbird graduate. So Renee, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives today as well.
Thank you, Doug, for that introduction. And thank you, Dr. JAVIDAN, for explaining the global mindset to us, for helping us understand that, why we need it, who needs it, and how you can obtain it. I don't know if one can obtain it that easily without going to Thunderbird, but I'm sure there are other ways. And I'm going to connect global mindset to the organizational structure. And so how is that involved in an organization structure? And especially the sustainability of an organization structure. So we come to the question of, can a global mindset lead to cultural sustainability? And if so, how? So when we're talking about the organization, we're talking about a multinational organization today, as global mindset is our topic. We could talk about a national organization, but that would be another subject. So back to the big question, can global mindset lead to cultural sustainability? The first question I always get is, what the heck is cultural sustainability, Renee? You found this term, what does it actually mean? Well, it's the process of maintaining a constant and a consistent culture in a company, while of course taking into account the regional and the local diversity. So how do you do this? How do you keep a corporate culture or an organizational culture constant? Well, I believe you have to do this by promoting values. The values are the bottom line. They're the guiding lines throughout an organization, and you try to keep this the same. Just to refer back a little bit to what Doug said, what I'm doing is I'm trying to find common values. I am finding common values between the Midwest, where I'm from Ohio, and the eastern part of France, where I'm working. We have the Germanic values. So that's just an example of how these values can be used to link two different areas. So where do you find these values in an organization? Sometimes a company will have to have a specific exercise. They'll have an activity where they decide these are our values. We're going to put them on our webpage, and everyone knows that. Other times, it's quite easy to identify the values. In a family-run organization, you're going to have values that were established right from the beginning and that have stayed the same way throughout the years. And this is one, I'm sure you all know this company, Velux, and they have had values that were established in the beginning when the company was founded in 1941, and they're still the same. They have these 5 values. If I take the value of local initiatives, this can be translated differently in every country. So perhaps in the US, a local initiative would be a local drive to collect food, for example, or often they have a day where all the employees will go down to the local river and they will clean up the trash. Perhaps in Japan, that would not work, and they would have a local initiative of an annual contribution to a cultural event. In Japan, they already have very long working hours, and I can't imagine that they want to go back to work and that they want to increase their hours with a participative event. So that's a value that could be interpreted differently, but it stays within their culture. A second way that you can find values is often in industries. So some industries have a value that are just born in that. For example, tech industries often have a lot of scientists and they'll have engineers. And with these people, you will find values of high performance, of a winning spirit, of innovation. Whereas if you're talking about an advertising agency, they have values more like trust, customer contact, authenticity. So that comes from the industry itself. And then you might have companies that are really have found values related to their founders. Their founders have put this at the base of the company. Now, I worked in Switzerland for quite a few years in the pharma industry, and I worked for a startup company, which was founded by 4 scientists, so 2 Swiss and 2 French. And they brought with them, as well as a molecule to be put on the market, they brought with them a lot of enthusiasm. The values of the company were the quest for scientific knowledge and innovation. These values were felt throughout the organization, which was small at the time, only about 200 of us, and everyone was rallied around these values. As the company grew, we put the product on the market, we started establishing affiliates, then we brought on board finance people and marketing people. Often these people were from Anglo-Saxon cultures. They had a bit different values and a bit different priorities, and these clashed somewhat with the scientific people. And I think that we lost some good people in the beginning there because there was not an effort made to create a consistent corporate culture. So you have these values that are helping you create a corporate culture. How do you promote that? How does that really trickle down inside the organization? So I think the first department we think about is HR. And this is where the company values will meet someone from the external, coming from the outside of the company. So in hiring procedures, the HR department should try to understand what are the values of this person. Now, I admit that's not easy. You can't say, listen, what are your values? Write them down, 1, 2, 3. But there are many ways that you can figure this out. And I would really encourage this because I think at this day and age, when we're having such a problem to find new employees and to keep them, it's a good idea to see if they might have the same values that you do. And if they agree with the corporate culture, they fall into it, then they'll become more engaged. And these are the people that you want. I am hearing so many stories about employees coming to work for 1 week and then they leave. So they're not engaged at all. So perhaps if they were feeling this corporate culture, if they felt the same values, then that would help keep these people on board. Similarly, in the HR department, you have learning and development. You have to make sure that the exercises you use are really culture relevant. And for example, in Anglo-Saxon countries, we often use role-playing exercises. These would not work so well in Asian countries because as Professor JAVIDAN was alluding to, and we all know, in Asian countries, you often have more of a circular mentality. I always have my hands automatically going like this because they are thinking collectively. So you need exercises where they don't have to respond individually, they can respond perhaps as a team. And then you also have promotion and relocation activities. You need to make sure that the person going into a new role understands the peer culture, that they feel comfortable. And if the values are the same, it will be much less difficult. And if the person, of course, has a global mindset, they'll be able to make that transition. The global mindset takes the corporate culture and translates it into the regional and local environment. Now let's look maybe at the marketing area. And we already saw one example with Coca-Cola where they failed terribly because they didn't understand the differences. Well, I don't know if you've heard the story, but Procter & Gamble tried to sell Pampers in Japan. And when they went there, they printed their boxes as normal with the nice stork, put it out there on the market, and they thought, okay, let's go. A few weeks later, nothing was happening. The Japanese were not buying this. And they couldn't figure it out until someone decided to, well, let's see, what the Japanese say about children, babies being delivered. And they found out that actually the Japanese believe the babies are delivered in a floating peach, giant peach. Now you might ask me, where does this come from? Well, it seems that there is a folktale in Japan that tells about an old couple living by a river. And he went to the fields one day and she went down to the river to do the washing. And there went a giant peach floating by. She took it up, took it home, and decided to take a bite. She instantly turned into a beautiful young woman. And then her husband came home. He did the same thing. This beautiful young couple made passionate love that night. And 9 months later, the baby was born. So this is why they have this story about babies being delivered in floating giant peaches. So you need to know this. Pampers did not have the person with the global mindset that could inform them of this information. So you need global mindset people on your marketing teams to check the names. Are they understandable in other cultures? Do they have obscene meanings in the other cultures? What are the contexts? And we could go on for days, and I'm sure Professor JAVIDAN has hundreds of stories to tell about that. So that's the marketing department. The legal department should also have global-minded people, and you get people that understand the local labor laws, so that when you have problems with employees, with unions, they know what the context is, also when they're signing contracts. In finance, which is actually the area that I originally came from, I have to say, I don't think that global mindset is as prevalent as it could be, or as in other departments. So when I was working for Hoffmann La Roche in Basel, Switzerland, I was assigned to a specific team that was appointed to finish the registration and put on the market a new biotech product. And I was responsible for the finance. So we had licensed in this product from a Silicon Valley startup. So obviously you had two different cultures here, startup American culture and the Swiss big pharma culture. So one day I went to the accounting department and I needed some new cost code, something very simple. And the Swiss accountant promptly said, well, no, that is, c'est gar nicht möglich. It's just absolutely not possible. I can't give that to you. So I kind of was a bit puzzled and went back and thought, oh, Renee, you didn't have a global mindset. You didn't think that these Swiss people, that these Swiss Germans have the mentality, which is very good, but it's very rigorous and it's not as flexible as it could be. And especially in the accounting department. So the next day I went back, I formulated my request a little bit differently. I assured him that this would not be changing the basics of the accounting principles of Hoffmann La Roche, and I was able to get my new cost accounts. So I used my global mindset there, but of course, everyone stumbles in between. So getting back to startups, that I work quite often with startups in the biotech area, in medtech area, and really I can only encourage them very strongly to put the values and the corporate culture in place as soon as possible so that it becomes sustainable. And what you need is the global mindset, because most of these companies are going to be going global. And you repeated that, Professor JAVIDAN. They're not going to stay here, especially these medtech, medical device companies. They have to go across the world. And they will find it more difficult if they have not put that in place. So put the values right there at the base of your business. So what about a country? Can a country have cultural sustainability? And I'm sitting in France. I'm sitting in Alsace. I believe that France really has a sustainable culture. You know, we have castles. We have churches that have been here for hundreds of years. We have a cuisine that is 100 years old. The béchamel, which is a basic white sauce, was created in the 1700s, and it's still the basis of French cuisine. And the Napoleonic law is still the basis of the education system. It's still officially in effect. It's the basis of the education system and the loss of succession here. On the other hand, the American culture, I do not feel is a sustainable culture. I'm not making a judgment, I'm just observing. It changes along with values, along with the norms, along with the mode. How many of you have heard of a portobello mushroom before 1980? when it was put on the market by Natural Foods. So that's something that it changes so much, the American culture. So my last question to you would be, are there some professions where a global mindset is really needed? What do you think about doctors? Do they need it? Teachers, politicians, do they need a global mindset? I'll leave you with this question.
Really good questions to end that with. I'd like to now switch over into the Q&A, and Renee, I'd like to start with you. One of the questions in the chat area relates to a topic that I also was interested in is, are you born with global mindset and kind of like sort of like introvert extrovert kind of thing? Is that how we should be thinking about it? And are there ways to improve it? I'm presuming from your accounting perspective, those of us that have been involved with global business, I think we can almost predict that mostly accountants, almost because maybe they are not very globally, mindset, they're in that profession, right? They're very rigid in kind of the way they approach things. And that's a good thing when it comes to processes and orientation. But so many of the other functions, you have to have flexibility. So are there ways to improve that? And could you talk a little bit about that? Maybe both of you.
Well, I could just say that you certainly are not born with it. In Northwest Ohio, where I come from, there aren't that many people that have a global mindset. So it's something that I think you need this psychological capital. You need to have the desire, the motivation to want to learn about other countries, other cultures. And you need to have a certain amount of social skills, of course. You can, of course, when you go to a different country, instead of just sitting there and staying in your hotel room, or when you're on an exchange program, you can, of course, go out there and look to have contact with the people. When I would go into the different affiliates as an internal auditor, I would actually always talk a lot with the secretary there, which was not always looked upon favorably by some of the European headquarter people. But I found out a lot about the mentality by talking to the secretary, because that person was maybe had a little more time, had a little bit more possibility to tell me what really went on in that country. And that's how I learned about different countries. But it definitely takes a desire. I'll let you go on with that, Professor JAVIDAN. What else you would add?
I agree with everything you said, Renee. What we have found is that, remember, our notion of global mindset has 3 dimensions. The intellectual capital is a learned dimension. So you can learn it, you can take courses, you can attend programs, you can go to websites. So the intellectual capital side of global mindset can be developed rather easily. The toughest part to develop is psychological capital, as Renee was talking about, the desire, the passion. There is some element of personality involved, life experiences, childhood experiences. So improving a person's psychological capital is not as easy and as quick as improving their intellectual capital. The interventions are more complex. Social capital side of global mindset requires practice. You just need to help people negotiate, communicate, and then give them feedback on how, what did you do to be a good listener? This is what worked, this is what didn't work, and these are areas you need to improve. And then based on that feedback, you put them again in a practical situation where they have to experience it. So different elements of global mindset require different types of intervention.
I see. So when you're working with companies and thinking about an executive at a company that is maybe an accidental exporter, and they recognize they need to be more global and they'd like to be more global, and they look at their team, and I think about, Renee, what you just said, like if you're born in Fort Madison, Iowa, kind of along the river there, and you've never really had any experience with international, and that's where your plant is, where do you go from there, where you want to have certain business aspirations to be global and have a team that is globally minded and has a global mindset, and yet you're starting kind of from either a base or you're not at a place where you want to be? Are those people that you work with? And then what are some of the things that they should be thinking about and for you to get involved with?
Yes, of course, you work with those kind of people every day. I think that's the majority of people that you work with, actually.
Okay.
What can you try to do? Well, for example, what I'm trying to do with people from the Midwest that come here to France and vice versa is to show them the common values that we have. So yes, we're very different and we eat differently and we have different time schedules and all of this, but we're both, in this case, we're both very determined to put the healthcare sector as the basis of our economies. I'm speaking about the certain places in the Midwest and here in Alsace, in Strasbourg. We have this commonality. We have the Germanic influence, which on both sides. And I think that brings the values to the forefront. Even there are funny things that are in common. We both have the largest groundwater surface we have it here in the middle of Europe and in the Great Lakes area. It's the biggest groundwater surface. And then what I like to do at the end of a meeting, end of a day, is to bring people together around a glass of wine. Because then I think people have the chance to talk about their personal things and they see, that person also has a child that's playing soccer or having problems in school, and you bring them down to a human level. And then you try to establish the relationships so that even cultures like the US culture, which is more task oriented, they're still human, of course. And when you bring people to the table and around a glass of wine, or it could be something else, they find their commonalities, I think. So that's a way to get around that.
So you're saying to understand the differences, go to what the commonalities are.
Exactly.
Contrast, like, hey,
Yes.
these are what you have in common, but there's things that are different, and be aware of those. Okay.
Yes.
Professor JAVIDAN, when you walk into an organization and talk to them, I presume a lot of these are the same types of things that Renee talked about that you get involved with. I presume also that you might also make recommendations about bringing in people with fantastic global mindset to be role models, or training issues. And are there some other tricks and thoughts that you have in terms of that you use to get companies to make progress quickly?
Doug, my institute is approached by different types of companies. One particular category of clients are corporations that have fantastic products. They're very successful in their home market, whether it's an American company or a Japanese company or a Chinese company, and they have global ambitions. So they have what they believe is a great product, very successful in their home market, and they want to take it out across borders. So a client like that comes to us, and their question is, we have what it takes to be successful in global markets, or do we? What criteria should we look for before we decide to start investing in countries outside of our borders? And our approach to help them is to help them understand that for your company to be successful outside of your home country, there are other requirements in addition to having a great product, having a great production facility and capability. So educating them and helping them understand the additional metrics that they need to pay attention to as a CEO and as a top management team before they decide, is it the right time to go out? Now, what happens is I had one very successful American company. We had a 2-day workshop. At the end of the 2-day workshop, the CEO stood up and said, it's very clear we are not ready to go global. it was really interesting to see the CEO stand up to his top management team and make that comment. So that's one outcome. Another outcome is, okay, now help us improve and develop in the areas that we were not paying attention to, in the metrics that are critical for our success. So that's where we help them do an assessment, learn about, well, what kind of skills do we need? What kind of knowledge and information do we need as a top management team to be aware of what's going on in different parts of the world, and to make sure we don't make the kinds of mistakes that the Coca-Cola salesman in the first example made.
You mentioned about an institute and your institute. Can you talk a little bit more about what that is?
Sure. My institute is called Najafi Global Mindset Institute. It's a Thunderbird. At my institute, we specialize in creating knowledge and disseminating it to various audiences. So we do a lot of research, as you might have guessed by now, with all kinds of organizations in many different countries. And we distill that information to be helpful to our own students at other business schools. My institute works with 20-some business schools to help them better internationalize their programs. And then, of course, we work with corporations and organizations in the US, in other countries. One of my most colorful clients has been the Communist Party of China. Every time I mention that, the reaction, Renee's reaction is very normal. And I gotta tell you, when I asked them, well, why do you need me? What's going on? Why am I invited to be with you in China? Their response was, well, you know, the Communist Party is really not doing a very good job of communicating with people who are not Chinese. We got to figure out how to do a better job of communicating ourselves and learning about other people. So yeah, but all of our work at the Institute is based on science. That's very important. I'm a scientist, so what excites me is creating new knowledge for others to benefit from. And that's what we do at the Institute.
Fantastic. We only have a couple minutes left, and so I'd like to ask each of you just to do about a minute wrap up or anything else that maybe got left out. Renee, would you like to go first?
You caught me there. Well, it's interesting to have been able to talk about these two things together, because cultural sustainability is a subject that a couple of years ago, I kind of invented it because sustainable development is something that is very close to my heart. And of course, intercultural is also. And I was asked to teach a course, and I thought, well, let's put these two together and see what happens. So over the years, I've been able to kind of twist the terms around sustainability, culture, sustainable culture, cultural sustainability, and just get people thinking. And I think that's what's important. There was a question in there: can sustainability and adaptability coexist? To me, adaptability is necessary for things to be sustainable. If it's just rigorous, as I said, certain mentalities, but rigorous, it's not going to be sustainable. That doesn't work everywhere in the world. And I think that we're seeing that now when people try to take their systems and duplicate them exactly somewhere else, it doesn't work. That's why you have to take into consideration regional and local diversity. So adaptability is part of sustainability for me. Thank you so much for organizing this.
I really appreciate you bringing that up. I think it seems like another topic too that we should probably cover during the year. I'd like to offline understand a little bit more about that and its importance, or because it's a new concept. So thank you for bringing that into the conversation today. Professor JAVIDAN, thank you so much for all that you do. Would you like to make some closing comments, please?
Sure. First, thank you, Doug, for organizing this, and thank you all of our attendees for spending your time with us. I want to go back to what I started the presentation with. Globalization is a reality of our time and reality of our world. Don't believe these prophets of doom and gloom. There is no evidence. Even COVID could not stop globalization. So our world will continue to be increasingly connected. Now, I mentioned that different forces will be playing in this new world. One of the big forces is governments. Governments of different countries, for many decades, their focus was, let's open the doors, let's get foreign investment, let's make it easy for our country and our operations, our companies to be interacting with people outside of our country. That priority has changed. Now governments and political bodies, because of pressure inside their own countries, are going to play a more intrusive and more active role. And it doesn't mean globalization is going to slow down. It means those of you who are involved in global roles have to pay attention to the political forces that are going to be increasingly active in your operations. So keep that in mind. One last thing one last comment I want to make. If you have kids, ask yourselves as parents, are you doing what you need to do to prepare your kids for the future that's awaiting them? And the future that's awaiting them. You know, I was talking to an executive and I said to him, well, pace of change today is faster than any time in history. And he said, the pace of change in the future will never be as slow as it is today. Think about that. Are you preparing your kids? One last comment. If you have direct reports, if you have teams of individuals working for you, what are you doing to prepare them for the reality of a global workplace? Think about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Certainly one of the things that comes to mind when I listen to your questions is Thunderbird. Thunderbird School of Global Management for me has been an inspiration. I remember in the old campus in Glendale, Arizona, walking on Glendale, Arizona probably is the least global place to ever be. There's like nothing global.
Exactly.
10 years ago. But when you walk on that campus back in those days, life changed. All the international people and the thought processes, and just it was magical. And it really was a key for me to understand that there are these global tribe people and global thinkers. So now that Thunderbird has closed that campus and opened up this new building that Professor JAVIDAN is sitting in front of, if you will, and within, you know, it'll be interesting to see how Thunderbird evolves. But I think what I've already observed is that technology is becoming more important for the university, and the communication of things like global mindset can happen in a stronger and better way, and more people can participate going forward because of that technology and because of what Thunderbird is doing. So I'm very optimistic by actually almost all the things both of you have talked about today. And I'm very positive about Thunderbird, so much so that Global Chambers headquarters is moving into that building in just a few weeks. I want to make a couple final comments about the rest of the year and what we're planning to do at Global Chamber before we close today's program, just a minute or two. We do events like this because it's important for companies that are growing internationally. We need to talk with each other about things that are important for our success, and global mindset is certainly one of them. If you're going to export, you better understand your markets, you better understand that people are different, and you need to continually step up the game. right? What we were good at 5 or 10 years ago, we need to be even better, as Professor JAVIDAN talked about. It's never going to be as slow as today. So if those of us that want to be around for 5, 10, 20 years, we better get better. And resources like the two people we talked to today, Thunderbird School of Global Management and members of Global Chamber, are all key resources for your business to grow. We also, besides making warm introductions, which is the main thing we do at Global Chamber, we do events. We're planning over 600 of them this year, this being the first one. We do a variety of things to connect members to opportunities, to new clients, to resources. And we also do educational programs like what we've done today. We have a variety of things coming up. So check out the agenda. Make sure that you're part of the newsletter. Follow us on social media, particularly in LinkedIn. And hopefully this year will be your most successful global year ever. I totally agree with Professor JAVIDAN that globalization is not going to die. As Kofi Annan said, to argue against globalization is to argue against the laws of gravity. It's a fruitless conversation. It's only going to get more and more. And 85% of business in the next 5 years is outside the US. And so if you have a US company, you need to think globally, and global mindset is certainly one of the key things you need to know. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Professor JAVIDAN. You have a great day. Thank you for all of you who came today. Have a great rest of the year and a great week. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.